Nebivolol is a useful beta blocker drug used clinically to treat high blood pressure. Nebivolol does this by blocking beta-1 receptors and stimulating beta-3 receptors. In this mnemonic video, I'll cover everything you need to know about Nebivolol, so you're ready for test day. Let's get started. What a beautiful day. The sun is out, and I think my son is playing outside. What could go wrong? Uh-oh, it looks like he got himself into trouble with our anchor for this scene, our neighbor. By the way, doesn't the word neighbor sound like the word Nebivolol? Get it? Neighbor for Nebivolol? Or neighborvolol? Like any mischievous young boy, it seems my son has a liking for lollipops. Check out that lollipop he's got in his mouth. Coincidentally, this lollipop is our recurring symbol for the lol ending common to all beta blocker drugs, which is relevant because Nebivolol is a beta blocker, of course. Just use this lollipop to remember that neighbor. I mean, Nebivolol is a beta blocker with the common drug ending lol. So which beta receptor does Nebivolol actually work to block? Let's find out. Oh, I see why our neighbor is mad. My son is playing with that darn BB gun again. He probably fired it at our neighbor, even though I specifically told him not to point it at people. It looks like the neighbor got so mad that he slapped the BB gun right out of my son's hands. By the way, a BB gun is our recurring symbol for beta-1 receptors. Get it? BB for beta, and gun as our recurring rhyme for the number 1. It's the beta-1 BB gun. Therefore, this BB gun falling to the ground here after getting slapped out of my son's hands should symbolize Nebivolol's action of blocking beta-1 receptors. Recall from our video on beta-1 receptors that beta-1 receptors are primarily found on the heart, where their signaling increases contractility and heart rate to increase cardiac output. Therefore, blocking beta-1 receptors by Nebivolol works to decrease cardiac output. This reduction of cardiac output reduces blood pressure, since less blood is going into the vessels, means the contents of the vessels are less pressurized. So you just have to picture this falling BB gun to recall the blocking of beta-1 receptors by Nebivolol. Got that? I really feel bad for our neighbor. It looks like he was just enjoying his favorite hobby of gardening. In fact, he looks like he was watering his favorite bonsai tree. You could even say our neighbor was stimulating his bonsai tree. By the way, a bonsai tree is our recurring symbol for beta-3 receptors. You know, bonsai for beta and tree as our recurring rhyme for the number 3. It's the beta-3 bonsai tree. As I mentioned before, the neighbor was stimulating this bonsai tree with his care. This should cue you into how Nebivolol works by stimulating beta-3 receptors. Beta-3 receptor stimulation ultimately leads to production of nitric oxide, a potent vasodilator of blood vessels. We'll talk more about this in our next symbol, so just sit tight. Speaking of nitric oxide, it looks like my neighbor really stepped up his gardening game. He even bought a tank of nitrogen for his bonsai tree and other plants. You know, since nitrogen is good for plants and all. This nitrogen tank must have been left outside in the garden, since it's all rusted. By the way, this rusty nitrogen tank should remind you of increased production of nitric oxide. You know, since a nitrogen tank should remind you of nitric, and the rust should remind you of oxide, since rust is just a form of oxidation. Just as I mentioned, the stimulation of beta-3 receptors causes an increase in nitric oxide production. Nitric oxide is a potent dilator of blood vessels, and its release leads to systemic vasodilation that reduces vascular resistance. This reduction in vascular resistance also decreases blood pressure, kind of like how releasing a squeezing hold on a hose causes the water inside to become less pressurized. Now that we've covered the mechanism, let's talk about how Nebivolol is used. It seems that when the kid shot this tank with his BB gun, the tank ended up leaking out all its pressurized gas. By the way, this release of pressure in this tank is our symbol for the decrease in blood pressure seen in patients when taking Nebivolol. You got it. Nebivolol can be used to treat hypertension by decreasing blood pressure. We literally just covered the mechanism of this. Beta-1 blockade causes reduction in cardiac output, while beta-3 agonism causes release of nitric oxide. Both of these work to decrease systemic blood pressure, treating hypertension. Make sense? Before we wrap up, I want to mention a possible adverse effect of nebivolol, AV block. I don't want you to memorize this with a symbol because it's pretty easy to reason through. You see, beta-1 signaling is crucial for stimulating AV nodal conduction. Beta-1 blockade by nebivolol therefore slows down AV nodal conduction, which reduces heart rate. However, this inhibition of the AV node may also cause AV block, which manifests as a prolonged PR interval on EKG. Pretty much all beta blockers can cause AV block by blocking beta-1 receptors, so I don't think this is that helpful for narrowing your choices down to nebivolol. Got that? Alright, that's it for nebivolol. Let's summarize what we've learned. Nebivolol is a beta blocker drug that is clinically used to treat hypertension. It does this by way of two different mechanisms. The first is to block beta-1 receptors, leading to decreased cardiac output. The second is to stimulate beta-3 receptors, causing an increase in nitric oxide production, causing vasodilation that reduces systemic vascular resistance. It is the decreased cardiac output and decreased vascular resistance that together lead to the lowering of blood pressure. All right, now we're done for real. We better step in to apologize to our neighbor before the situation gets any worse. Till next time,